as we enter 1753, I realized, hey, I forgot to put the 1752 scores down, or 42, sorry, scores down. I did so, and we have two political events up here. Frankfurter Union. This is going to give 2 strength points to either the Bavarians or the French if it passes. If it's chosen. And this one is Alexei Bastashov, which is going to which can move Saxony to neutral, and not automatically, and can move the Russian marker in either direction. Anybody who's moving Saxony to neutral probably wants to move the Russian marker deeper anti-Prussia, but who knows, maybe the Prussians are more interested in the Saxon. Okay. Or have already lost Saxony and don't mind pushing them. Austrians picked hearts, which they had a good card in, but the Pragmatic Army already had some hearts banked and was able to get this. That's because these are important cards. The Pragmatics can't play in this one, but they can play in this one, and they can cause France to not be able to use it. The other card, Austria is going to trigger, and that neutralizes Saxony, we'll get to that in a moment, and pushes Russia deeper into the anti-Prussian camp. I'll be back with the neutralization of Saxony. Number of effects to the neutralization of Saxony. The first one is their pieces go back to their starting locations. Anybody who was in here had to leave. Any victory point markers there disappear. Saxony isn't opposed to anyone, so they can't invade anywhere. They're, not able to cooperate with anyone, obviously. Austria controls Saxony, though, for drawing cards and such on. And these all get banked. Try to do that if I can. But there was something else. Oh, so there's a statement that Austria controls them that sounds like for the rest of the game, which leaves me a little fuzzy here. Notably, the way it's worded is, from now on, player Maria Theresa plays Saxony. All rules of neutrality must be obeyed. Can't leave home country, they can't participate in combat, and nobody can enter them. Okay. And remember, you can be adjacent to things. You're adjacent to things to fight them. I had the rules wrong on that. So there would be opportunities to fight even if nothing could enter Saxony. But that sort of implies that even if it does push down here, the Austrians control them. Now, does that mean that they're allied and the Austrians control them? Or is there a mistake in the rules? Or can it not move left and that's just not stated? I'm choosing to go with you can re-ally with Prussia and Saxony joins Prussia again. One thing you have to do, because this sheet technically is cut into pieces, is I removed all the markings for Rutowski there and moved his 8 strength points over into the Austrian side of things. That'll help me remember who owns it, but whatever. Okay, French and Bavarian turn. French are putting things close to the edge here, again. I've decided not to withdraw completely yet. Instead, I'm slamming down, trying to open up Budweis. If I can capture a few more here, because I'm real close again. Why am I real close? Well, because of these 2 question marks, and I'm launching an attack on Earl of Stair. If that fails, I get those 2 points back. But I could well end up getting 2 battle points here, and this game could be over. The distinction to how the battle works now is there's a little bit more variability. I'm not in the same space anymore, so I'm not sharing the same suit. So, for example, these guys use hearts, these guys use clubs, these guys use spades, these guys use diamonds. You could well be in the same space. But there's a little bit more differentiation. It's not like, before it was, well, we'll both be using the same. Well, here, we're using different. If it was down here, we'd be using the same. If it was here, we'd be using a different set of difference. It's just a matter of there's a lot more flexibility. Well, actually, we'd be using the reverse set. But there's a little bit of, I think, additional information being provided, not to the players, but to the storyline that still doesn't really map to anything, but there's something else, another layer there. Okay, let me fight the battles and see if this game is over. Positioning, and it wouldn't have affected the Bavarians if they were attacked from the north, does determine which direction you go in to some extent, because you have to retreat as far away as possible from the enemy. The French lost this battle. It was a big and expensive one. The Pragmatics played 2 reserves. The French played their entire heart's hand, the Pragmatics their entire club's hand. But it's a 6-point swing. That's 2 victory points for the Pragmatics. These are not won. This makes this a less important battle for both sides, and we have to retreat. Well, the first space is to here. That's no problem. Second is to here, I think, legitimately, but I can't then start swinging in this direction. Third, fourth, and already now I'm in France. This is getting closer, I think, so fifth, sixth, I'll push them that far. But I have no opportunity to kind of, send them running down into Germany, which I was afraid could happen. The Germans take a 3-hit loss here, which was enough for 1 victory point for the French, and giving them control of the political marker. Good thing they chose to do the battles in the order they did. They're still 3 away from winning, and in the most dangerous of all the positions. And the Bavarians are coming back now. I can't go storming out into here and expect to do much with them, but because I don't have my supply wagon yet, I'll be able to buy that before movement in the next turn. I don't think I was able to buy it this time. Let me make sure, because if I could buy it at any time during movement, I would have. During the movement phase. So I think I could have done it after I moved out of the space. So yeah, so I'm going to actually spend my 4 points and build things regroup themselves after being out of supply because of the Hussies into a better and more solid position. I'm worried I may have had the Austrians here. It's very hard for me to see 2 things as being fighting each other just because I'm used to the point-to-point not, you have to be in the same space. It may also have been here. I got a little confused. There's stuff going on. Anyway, the Austrian reaction was to throw themselves into a more of an anti-French position and position themselves to take the Saxon fort back. The Saxon won fort, but that's a pro-Prussian fort. Prussia is in a position now, though, where they can grab this and do the sue for peace. They don't have a lot of points in Austria, though, so they're not going to get to bag half those points or whatever. Of course, if they had a lot of points in Austria, they'd be close to winning and be less enticed towards integrating Silesia. I think the Silesia integration makes a lot of sense to them, because they've already lost Saxony, so they may just take this as their peace offering. Anyway, over here, King George marched down to Verdun to put him in conflict with this guy. It did a heavy, heavy victory on him, but used up another reserve card. However, it gets him a Luxembourg. And we're seeing the French are no longer anywhere near the victory state. They lost their victory point marker, and the control over the political marker has swung over to the Pragmatics. There's some risk here, though, that supply could be cut. I'm not quite sure how. If this army hadn't been retreated so far, there would be a danger of being able to cut it across here. So the Pragmatics were definitely taking a risk by marching down there. I thought I was going to destroy the army because it looked like it was kind of a backwater army, but it turned out not to be. However, my cards won out quite heavily. And part of that is because I got to choose a suit where I still had strength, and the Prussians, I have no idea, or the French, I have no idea whether or not their spades were any good, although they just fought a battle in spades, so probably not. But I got to push them into there. So that's another thing. You get to retreat people into places that you know that they don't have cards for because of other battles, etc. Some of that can be explained away as in, you know, hey, you retreated them into a bad position. Just because you have some knowledge, and it doesn't bother me at all. What does bother me is just the where that bad position is determined on fights on the other side of the board or something like that. That, again, some of the weirdness. Some of it can make sense, most of it not so much. All right, that ends turn 7. What cards available this turn are this. France. It's France basically declaring war on England. But a number of players are involved in it, 3 different players. All it does is it moves the Italy marker. Kind of minor importance, but of much more perhaps importance is move Saxony all the way into the Austrian camp, no matter where the hell it is, and give them 2 extra troops. Okay? Well, Prussia does not want that to happen. The Pragmatic Army controls the suit, so they chose a suit. Prussia won it, which was hearts, which they already had, but hearts. But the Prussians had no additional hearts in their hand. They went with just that one because, in the end, the Saxon army might be annoying, but they can probably handle it. And if Saxony comes against them, it gives them more conquest capability. So they look at it as a not all that terrible. And also, hey, once we get this, we can try to see if Austria will sue for peace. And maybe they'll use the Saxon army against the French, and we're all good on that. So that was fine. France also didn't have any hearts. There's been a lot of fighting and hearts going on. Hearts, you know, must mean something. I don't know. Anyway, but that's the trump here and here. The Austrians decided to play fairly large on that, we'll see. Because they want one of these 2. I'm not sure which one. I think we want the Saxon one. So we'll boost that over. That gives Saxony an additional card every turn while they're all the way in the Austrian alliance for some reason, probably a matter of allied supplies coming in. This is like the quadruple alliance. The English, the Dutch, the Saxons, and the Austrians are all allied. That means that the French are able to get the one they wanted, which they'll push out of their problem. Now, you might say, well, wasn't France doing very well? Yeah, they were, but now not so much. And so they're not as big a worry. So people are more willing to let them have Italy, perhaps. Certainly Prussia doesn't care. This hurts the Austrians, which overall is a good thing for them. Part of this card doesn't help. Austria or Saxony already had a full army. I got nowhere to put those points, so they just burned. Now, this was, like the battles, an opportunity for bluffing where France and Prussia, they could have played an extra card, made it look like they were more potent. So whenever I feel like there's a clear opportunity like that, and I feel this way in some of the battles, hey, is it actually vital that I win this battle? Maybe not. Okay, I'll roll and see if I lose cards, especially if I'm fighting another battle. You know, I mean, if I'm fighting 2 battles in the same suit, that's a little different, but I might want to bluff that I'm strong in a suit, maybe take a minor loss or whatever. If I feel like I have those opportunities, I roll a die to make the decision. Yeah, I'll take a 1-point loss, you know, or whatever, instead of playing as hard as I possibly can. Although usually my opponents are playing high cards and getting big jumps early. That's not always, or usually I'm finding my players are doing that. It's not always an optimal situation. The reason it is optimal, though, or the reason that it is a strong solution to play a strong card right off, is that you can drive the enemy far back, and you can cost them a lot of troops, and kind of vacate the area so that you're free to operate there. A little retreat might not free up the fortresses you need. All right, Hussies. French win a little bit of battle here. Unterheide, Bundwis, both in diamonds. The Austrians had used up their diamonds. The French still had a ton of them. And this had not been controlled. What I did was moved from here 1, 2, 3. That's legitimate. There's nothing like a zone of control in this case, except for how you kind of protect the fortresses. And then I drove the Austrians down this way. My feeling is that opens up something kind of interesting to me where, you know, the Austrians are going to have to move back into range of my attack capability. They managed to limit their losses by playing yet another card, but weren't able to fully, you know, protect themselves. The French had a ton of diamonds, though. They pretty much could have won this on any number they chose, but they chose to try to go big again, you know, because they wanted to wipe this army out. Well, they didn't, but they got their victory point off of it, and I guess that's it. So Prussia has just conquered the last fortress in Silesia, and I believe they're going to offer the peace, because my figuring is neither Austria nor France is going to win during this time. I'm not going to gain anything significant out of it except for the additional supply wagon. But what I'm finding is my 3 Prussian generals have to be like clustered around the supply wagon as long as I'm fighting Austria. There's nothing else for me to fight. But let's look at the steps here. So Silesia becomes Prussian home country. If Saxony's a Prussian ally, it moves. Well, yeah, that's a good reason. Austrian victory markers in Prussia are returned. There aren't any. Austrian pieces. Now, Austria has to accept this, but they're willing to do it as well because they're kind of on the ropes from the French and don't really want to see more Prussian points being obtained here, although they do realize Prussia's going to get some recovery during this. Austrian pieces in Prussia are Poland or transferred? No. Prussia puts a victory marker in her victory box Silesia, which is over here. And we get this cube, which I don't know if it gets... where is this? Is it just available? And receives its second supply train on any Prussian major fortress, including Breslau. Well, I'm not at war with anyone. My armies are near Breslau. That's where we're going to put it. I hate following procedural lists like this, right? And some rule books are entirely that. This is not, but this is also not necessarily the best rules. Prussia's neutral until their action stage after next. So... next turn, nothing. Prussia comes back there. Now I'm using one of their elector markers, which are unimportant. I haven't really been paying attention to the electors. I don't know if they matter anymore. We've had the election. Prague is French. Mine's and share. These are split 2-2. Right, what's Hanover doing there? Oh, what the hell? Mannheim, Cologne. Where's Munich is over here. Dresden and Berlin aren't going to have changed hands. Okay, I think we're right, but it's really, I think, not important except for when the imperial election happens. So, yeah, the Prussians, there's more here. There's the victory marker there. Half of the Prussian victory markers rounded up are set aside. The rest are returned to the pool. Well, that's this one is going to be set aside. I don't know quite where to put it. I'll put it up here. And I guess I'll put the French ones up there too. But I got to remember, if Prussia leaves Prussia, which they have to win, they get their markers back. So this is nowhere near as interesting a mechanism as the one which the French have, but it does reduce the number of points that I'm putting on the board in case nobody gets to that, permanent victory. France can actually reduce their victory and win over here. Prussia can't go to peace and win an automatic victory, as far as I can see, unless they were, putting themselves down to like just 1 or 2 pieces and hoping to win off of something political. I don't know what. I am really having trouble because they don't get any of these. They can't win additional battles. So I really don't know. But this does give them a chance to recoup a little bit, gather up cards while other people are playing them. But they're out of the game, basically, during that time. Little things first, me trying to read a list of ingredients like this. Yeah, I forgot to move the Prussians back, which when I looked at it, yeah, that's not right. And then I also forgot, the Austrians are sitting on top of a Prussian victory point marker. But I probably wasn't going to gain more. I had just gained 1 victory point marker this turn, which I probably didn't even need to bother with. But I wasn't going to be able to gain 2. And if I gained another one, you know, in the time that I would gain another one, I'd be losing 1 here. So we're talking about at most a point over on here. I dealt out the cards. I haven't made my decisions what to do with the Austro-Saxons. Because the Saxons are really not positioned to do much against the French. And then over here, I'm kind of worried with the pragmatics. Now, this is one of the things. With Prussia not trying to win the game at this moment, they're just trying to build up. Maybe there's something I can do with the pragmatics, but maybe I don't want to. It's hard to tell. Forgot to mention, we're -1 French army. It was down to 1 strength point and out here, out of supply. Boom, it's dead. Pragmatics, you can see they're actually gathering up quite a bit of territory, except maybe they shouldn't have this one. That's always a problem, is that looked like, I don't know, not me, so I took a marker on it. Okay, but I'm in position, moving my bigger army up this way, the littler army around the side to try to clear up some of this. But of course now the French, we're coming up on winter. We're not there yet, but we're coming up on winter. The French will have another army maybe down here or something. But the French are definitely looking at an ugly position here. This Austrian army is running away because it's too weak to face anything. But we've got the Saxons coming down. We've got the Austrians clearing Prague here, which I should do that too. And I don't know, everybody's a little bit more worn down, which, you know, if they all kind of rest, that's not going to really help Prussia all that much, because Austria gains cards much more quickly than the Prussians do. The French and the Austrians are the big powers here. And if they're not fighting each other for some reason, like after France withdraws here, they could both be in much better situation. Of course, Austria can always rebuild their army back up here in the Netherlands because there's no major fortresses in the Austrian Netherlands. And, you know, start engaging the French in that way. But that's only 1 army. By the way, these little markers here mean that only the French and Austrians can cross that boundary between the maps. So you're not going to see Bavarians marching this way or something. Events are interesting to both France and Austria. Well, both the events are interesting to Austria. One of them is interesting to Prussia, although France can play in it. But it moves the Russian marker and would free up the Prussian army. The other one's interesting to the French. Now, the pragmatics could play in this one. This is bombardment of Naples. By saying, yeah, you know, the English aren't going to actually do that, and push the Italian marker in France's favor. But I see no real reason to help them that way. So what I did was I took the choice to help the Prussians with their Hearts card again, and didn't play another card because I don't have another heart, and I chose not to bluff here. I didn't feel like bluffing would do much. I think the French and Austrians are both going to play fairly large anyway, so I may get screwed. And maybe Hearts wasn't a great choice because of that, but let's see. Hearts wasn't a good choice. Everybody knows what I have there, for one thing, because it's been sitting there for a while. The French get their first choice, and obviously they want the Italy marker, so they'll take that. And then the Austrians will take the secondary and cancel this one out. They would rather not see the Prussians get that extra army. It's moderate sized. And to look like the 30 Years' War game, which kind of makes sense because as long as the armies aren't directly interfering with one another, they're kind of wandering around in circles conquering stuff on each other, right? I don't know how historically correct that is for this era. I know that, you know, if somebody is off facing another front, that's what happens, but I don't know that armies went around in circles the way they are here, and that felt a little weird in 30 Years' War as well, to tell you the truth. It feels like a mumbling style. which fits that more than here. The French swerve around here, but that means, hey, I'm not protecting things like Reims or even Saint-Quentin, and puts me in a little bit of trouble. I'm probably safe here. There's no hussies, so the Prussians would have to, or no, I'm sorry, the Dutch would really have to get around me. The Dutch are more constrained running off this single, with two armies, single thing. By the way, the French lost one of their battle victory points when they lost that unit, just in case you thought I missed that. I think. Maybe I did miss it, but I don't feel like rechecking. Now, over here, the French pull back. And again, they're opening up so Tabor is now available for the Austrians to come take. Is that a good move? I mean, I could have doubled back so that I protect Tabor, or I could have stayed here and kept it under protection. You know, this is probably the wiser move. Much as I want to come down and destroy this army, winter's coming, and this keeps all my holdings in protection. And once again, I'm getting close. I'm at 3 victory points. I don't have the electorate. Of course, I'm not really in the position to take it back, but if I can beat the Dutch army, or the Anglo army, whatever, Dutch-Anglo, Anglo-Dutch, things are in good shape. Now it's on the Prussians, who really just get to reposition in their territory and prepare themselves for their resurgence next turn when they come back in against Austria. Not much of a piece there, but to note, this was emptied out this turn, and exactly emptied out. No additionals. So now what happens is I compare the size of the decks, and these two decks obviously are not in contention. These two are, I believe, the blue deck. I'm not going to count them. I'm going to feel them. I believe the blue deck has a couple more cards, maybe 1 or 2 more cards. So this is going to get reshuffled and put in play. It's always the largest deck. Again, I don't know if you can game that in any way, but it's an intriguing prospect. There may be more important things to be spending your brain on in this game than that. Well, there certainly are, but some people might find that a very easy thing to do, where it's just so alien to me I don't even consider it. That's something you have to consider in game design. What are different people's capabilities? So somebody's capability to count cards may just be automatic because they're used to playing card games. Maybe they're used to playing, big deck blackjack, and are actually really used to counting, at least high-low, and they're probably not concerned with the suits then. The idea of 4 separate decks, etc., you'd probably have to train that separately. But for some people, they're just savants in certain things. And what does it mean if someone's capable of doing that? What is that edge? Is that some sort of, just given how little the cards seem to mean anyway, I'm not too bothered by what that edge may mean. That may be some kind of military brilliance that's just represented in that or something, but who knows? See how the little white marker gets put there. I had a question mark here, which got established. So the French marker goes away, but the Austrian marker doesn't go in place. It goes away as well. The Austrians defeat the Bavarians here, and the Austrians have a neat capacity, especially in territory like Bavaria. Basically, they can retreat you into a position that their hussies can screw you up. So they retreated the Bavarians up here outside their home country, the little patches where you can do this, right? And now what I have to do is I have to cut, I think, these 2 lines, which I can do. Because they're not in Austrian, or they're not in Bavarian home territory, and 2, 3, 4, 5, this isn't going to be able to get around without these 2 spaces, with me blocking that. So I'm going to cause an extra loss. I did not, I won the battle though. That gets me this marker. But I did not succeed in swinging any victory points for that. I didn't manage to do enough damage. Lots and lots of cards played, but not enough. Not enough to be able, not enough in favor of the Austrians to be able to score any victory points whatsoever. I would have had, and I didn't destroy the army itself. as we finish up the winter term. I'll leave this here to help remind me, because I'm probably going to play for a little bit, at least, maybe for until tomorrow. The Prussians have actually built up their field army, which is only 3 army units, right? But they built it up to maximum size. You can see the French put one down here. Austrians tried to rebuild this because basically they have 2 armies that are completely useless because they're 1-point armies. You can't risk that kind of shit. So they built one of them up. They're going to send the other one away to go rebuild later. They could have put them both at medium, but then, you know, there's a chance you lose 2 armies. You might as well send one with 1 less strength point. I think even the pragmatics built up a little bit. It's hard to make that decision, though, and I've gone into this before, the decision of, do I want to spend card points that I can use for political stuff, and perhaps most importantly, that in battles are just worth more. And if I'm not going to use, if there are cards that I'm pretty sure I don't need right away, yeah, scoring them as troops might be more valuable, because troops count for your battle value every time you go into a fight until you start losing them, you know. There's certainly interesting trade-offs based on this combat system and the production system and all that. It's just there's something very brilliant about it all. It just is so impossible for me to bridge the gap between the reality and whatever this representation is supposed to be. So I've been screwing up with the political display. You can always play a card for no effect. There's 2 issues here. You can always play a card for no effect, and you get it back. So if you play something of the wrong suit, it doesn't get banked. Instead, it goes back in your hand. Therefore, there's never a situation where somebody doesn't play, because you could say, well, everybody's bluffing then. Yeah, it's not really. Everybody's able to put a card down, and nobody knows who's put what down. Whatever is banked isn't affected, but whatever you played this turn goes back in your hand if it's of the wrong suit. The other thing that I had wrong was I read the reserve cards, which, you know, are always 1 to 8s, right? Well, I just forgot the rule. If you play a reserve card in this, they're not only the correct suit, but they're 16 points, not 8. Anyway, we have a couple of interesting ones up here. Catherine, which allows you to move Russia by a point in either direction. And of course the Prussians are involved along with others. And then this is basically a separate piece for Sardinia. Austria could get 2 spaces in their direction trying to hurt France. France could get 1 space in their direction, which would actually hurt Austria at this point. And the pragmatics could play in this. They chose not to. Now, I'm not going to actually play that dummy card, but I'm going to play a little differently, as though there's no more, you know, because I've been playing with this information that, like, oh, the pragmatics aren't playing. Oh, 2 people didn't play. I'm guaranteed 2nd place at least, so I'll throw a crappy card in that's worth playing. Anyway, the Prussians chose not to play in this one, which means the Austrians have first choice. They care most about this. The Prussian one isn't very important at all, so they'll put that forward. And then the French, well, the French feel like the Prussians are doing better than the Austrians, so even though we're technically aligned with Prussia, and Prussia is helping us fight Austria, we're not sure we terribly want Prussia to be doing all that well. So we're going to kind of screw with those relations. So, French pushed their way through, grabbed another space. This is okay because they were able to bring the out of supply now, because the Hussies, remember, had Bavarians trapped. Bavarians are providing support here at, what is this, Klattau, and are able to prevent that or Sham or anything else over in this area from falling immediately. Now this space is in danger, but it's too far away. as is this space. So the Austrians aren't going to gain anything down there, whereas the French are gaining territory down there. Up here, the French press into the Austrian Netherlands, and then also jump here into Luxembourg because the Pragmatic Army is just a little too far away again. And I'm also in kind of a striking distance where I could swing up and threaten their supply wagon. And my own supply wagon might be able to get into a position where there's a good chance that I'd be able to be in supply. It's not guaranteed. It depends on the location I put myself in, because there's 3 armies here. They could grab 3 spaces and, you know, surround me and cut me off that way for whatever value that might have. Finally, we have sort of a mad scramble to protect things from falling. With the Pragmatic Army moving up here so that the Austrians don't lose any of these. What do we care about the Austrians? Nothing. But we care about the fact that France is down to 1. And if we lose a battle against France, that could be the game, you know. So there's some risk there too. You have the Austrians running down, trying to take Budweis back because Glatau is protected, but the Bavarians are going to be able to move in and, you know, probably put themselves in a position where they can protect both of these. They got to be careful about the Hussies though, because they're already out of supply for 1 turn. You have Austrians covering space here and here. The Saxons kind of pulling back away from Friedrich, just because I don't necessarily want to fight him. I'm in the best terrain possible for me, actually, or the best location possible. There was something that was in my head, but it's disappeared, that I thought was really cool. Oh, yeah. So, I've been harping on these card decks and how there maybe is some kind of card counting capability on a per deck basis. Now, there's a couple of reasons that the decks are divided as they are. One of them is, hey, let's make sure that there's a fair distribution over the first 4 quarters of the game, because there's no guarantee after that. People are holding cards and stuff, right? I don't know how big a deal that is. You're liable to get a pretty fair distribution if you shuffled all the cards together. The decision to go to 4 decks, the only real rationale for that I can see, is that card counting is a part of the game. Now, there's probably a very, very small percentage of people in the world who can count cards on 4 separate decks and try to manipulate which deck is going up correctly and stuff like that. Or try to stack the decks. Might be difficult as well. It may be an unintentional thing, but if it is, the designer's gone out of his way by making 4 separate decks that cycle through to create something kind of strange. Now, the reason might be simple. It might simply be, I don't like shuffling more than like 50 cards at a time or so, and there's like 40 something in each of these because, let's see, I think there's 40 cards. No. There's more than that. I think there's like 42 cards per deck. I think there's going to be 2 wild cards in there, but I'm not positive. But they go from 1... no, they don't go from 1 to 10, do they? They go from like 2 to 10. So there's less. I think. I don't think I've seen any 1s, because that would confuse people. That would be like an ace. Anyway. There are not quite a full deck in there. But it may just be that they didn't want to deal with the mechanism of shuffling large decks. I never tend to think in those directions. That could certainly be an annoying factor. But otherwise, it really does feel like the design decision was put there for this really kind of, I think of it as so out of my league type of play, where you're able to keep track of what the composition more or less is across 4 decks, and able to manipulate that composition enough that you can try to force one of those decks into play earlier than another or something. And I don't see it, but a lot of times I don't see all of the depth in a game. If that's actually an intention here, I'm not thrilled with it. It seems really a terribly gamey aspect, but it also seems to be baked in completely to the game at some point. So, you might very well be able to have a computer player who, if they can get the other aspects down, the bluffing, and that's possible, but the hard part is actually the permutations on the board and understanding where best to place your pieces. For a long-term game, the short-term gain, not just short-term gain, but also short-term protections and such not, that should all be easy. It's the strategic side of, should I be defending fortresses, or do I really care if Prussia gets a couple more victory points, or Austria in this case is really the big issue. They're the person who can't really win at this point. So making that kind of decision and that kind of evaluation in a situation is the tough part on a computer program. But how if you could kind of stimulate that and get that effective enough that reasonably good tactical play, which I think a computer would be very capable of doing in this, combined with something you can gain from the card counting, etc. I think that maybe you'd have an edge there of some sort. I don't know. But certainly a player who has that sort of atavistic capability to just go in and, wow, I can just, have a feel for how well I want a certain deck to be doing, so I'll use cards of that deck when possible. That kind of capability, I can't project what it would even mean to the game, but it does seem to be a part of the design. All right, we make it to the end of the game. The political stakes have gotten significantly higher with some of the cards, but they're for less time. One of them here, the Jacobite Rising. This is going to be the Pragmatic Army has to send an army back into Scotland. They get a -1 card. That's for the rest of the game. There's no way out of them. And then they've got, well, that's the rest of the game issue there. This one, Genoa. Nobody cares about Saxony particularly. I mean, if Saxony moved to the left, that would be kind of a big deal, but it would take them out of the Austrian camp, but they can't go any further. But this one is a total of 3 moves distance, 2 in one direction, 1 in another for Italy. Each of these are only played by 2 players. Now this one would obviously be canceled, but this one would be used by either player in the direction it goes. Played out the cards. Prussia's not involved. Austria picked clubs for their own reasons. Maybe they should have consulted with the Pragmatic Army, mainly because France is 1 victory point away at this point, right? The loss of a Pragmatic Army is a pretty big deal. And what we see is the Austrians can affect the one that they want, which will give a -1 card over to the French. But then the French are able to take the ugly one. And at this point, we have to figure out what that means for the Pragmatic Army, which is not very potent anyway. They may receive subsidies from someone. Certainly Prussia can give them a subsidy, but Austria could as well. And actually, I don't think Prussia can because they're on different sides, different alliances. But Austria can. And they kind of need a card pretty badly. The real problem is, though, everybody kind of needs cards, and the only person who can be spared from the fighting, the Austrians need to fight the French to keep this going, is Prussia. There's a real danger here that France is going to win an auto victory. And indeed, the French do pull it off. And the question is, would they have not pulled it off without that card purchase? I don't know, because they were able to smack this, which was a very weak unit, dissolve it, get a victory point for destroying the enemy army, get a victory point for capturing this town, which is outside the range of anything else. They also won a battle up here that they didn't even need to fight. Had they lost it, as long as it's by reasonable amounts, they would have just lost the extra victory point they have. That question mark's there because that's not even from their pool. And they were getting themselves in position for another shot with the Bavarians pulling up here. Hey, who's going to defend them, right? You know, the Saxon army can come down. This can if I needed more time, if it looked like I needed more time, I would have gone down this way. But the clubs was needed to fight up there, so I couldn't fight over in that area. Now, this isn't like a, oh my God, my supply lines are too stretched type of situation or anything like that. By the way, this thing probably should have moved. Or maybe it did, I don't know. Because I could have fought over here or over here. You know, it's not like there's any rational reason for the effect of, yeah, I fought over here, so I don't want to fight over there in that particular location. There's just no reason to link those two pieces of information that I can possibly see. But, yeah, I bitched about these cards all game. And honestly, every time I see the game, every time I look at the game, every time I think about the game, it's the one thing that sticks out is that, wow, this game sure gives you a lot of detail, the level of detail you'd expect out of a war game, you know, a light war game of a certain nature. And some of that detail just seems like it's magic stuff, you know? I mean, we're not even talking about the weather control type effect in a CDG style game where you could at least say, okay, well, that weather could happen. Here you've got like commanders making decisions for, you know, not because they're mystics or something that understand what the weather is going to be, but because part of this battle is being fought off on a completely different plane of existence from the world that we're used to. And that really gnaws at me. On the other hand, a lot of it does seem to play out fairly believably. I don't know how much accuracy there is to it. I've got some little problems. The way the supply trains work, I know that they're trying at least to model real supply. I'm a little fuzzy on trying to argue that they actually do work, that I don't need to be able to make some sort of trace supply from that wagon to somewhere else, that the fact that I have the wagon next to me is all that matters. You know, then I'm immune to any kind of raiders. And if I'm not fighting against the Austrians, if they're not my opponent, the fact that my wagon is, you know, within 6 of me, but it doesn't really matter. It's able to collect up supplies from the countryside. I'm not saying that that didn't happen to some extent, but you could not fight. Your major armies couldn't work with that level of supply either. So one of the things that I always saw as the strength of the game, I don't know if it's terribly a stronger point than the normal trace supply that like Freddy the Great uses or something. All right. What about what actually happened? I don't think that my error in play, first of all, there weren't that many battles that happened, but of course maybe more would have happened had you not had to actually enter the enemy's space. But I don't think it had a huge difference in terms of the flavor of the game. This is more about positioning your forces where you want to fight the enemy. And putting them in a position where they defend several fortresses. And then if the enemy wants to fight you to get rid of you, they do so. Because they want to be able to advance. Or they maneuver around and find a different direction to go in. It gives you an interesting, argument as to, hey, do I want to stack my armies so that they're stronger? Because, if I have like 16 strength points, well, and you have only one army, I have a +8 bonus to start things off with, at least. So that's pretty good, right? But by spreading out, I can do more stuff. Of course, the supply considerations, and especially for the Prussians, they can't spread out their army because the Hussars can pick on anything that doesn't have a supply wagon attached to it. Basically, maybe not in all cases. I mean, maybe their armies are too far away as they were here. How did the French get away with so much? Well, the French and the Austrians both have a fairly strong capacity to build up their army and be able to fight. If the French left the Austrians alone, like they withdrew from their plans, Austria would probably start fighting to a draw against the Prussians. But as it stood, with France being so close to victory, they didn't want to abandon their military goals because, hey, we won, man. If they were going for the draw victory, well, what are we looking at here? France has pulled up only 12 points, 16, 17, 20. So they had the lead in terms of the long-term, whatever glory there was for the early part of the war. This doesn't even cover the whole war. It just covers a few years of it. I think there's the first few. Yeah, because Silesia isn't completely taken. But of course, Prussia kind of drops out of the war towards the end. With another kind of, yeah, we'll accept your Silesia. I feel like France is actually in a fairly potent position comparatively, because Austria is beset by a French and a Prussian attack, and they have to choose to fight against one of those two. And then also the French army here, at least once they got that Austrian army out of the way, had a preponderance of force, 3 armies, 3-3 actually. But the flexibility of that larger pile of cards, even though they're fighting in 2 separate fronts, was pretty cool. And the fact that they can kind of target, one suit over here and another suit over here. You can do the same thing with the Austrians, right? But they might find themselves in a position where the French position themselves, here comes the silliness again, right? The French say, well, we'll position ourselves on hearts, and the Prussians will be positioned on hearts, and then the Austrians could fight one, but they can't fight both enemies or whatever, Just all kind of goofy stuff, because obviously if you were fighting here and here, you could only possibly win one of those battles, right? Whereas if you were fighting here and here, or here and here, the distances would be magically perfect, and you'd be, I have no idea what to talk about there. And again, that is really the glaring sore thumb for me for this game, and there's just no way I can overlook it. Okay. I don't know how much more to say in a wrap, so I'll come back with a review at some point.